Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey there, everyone! Ready for another deep dive?
I'm ready. Always excited to explore a new topic.
Today we're going to dig into a chapter of Canadian history that you might not hear a lot about, like the Cold War economy. We always
Wow.
hear about, like, the American perspective, right?
Right. Exactly.
But we're going to see how those global tensions actually shaped, like, the lives of everyday Canadians.
It's really fascinating how much those global events affected the average Canadian.
Yeah, we're talking jobs, products they bought at the store, you name it. And for this deep dive, we're using a history podcast episode called Canada's Cold War Economy and the Marshall Plan. So by the end of this, you'll not only grasp the key economic shifts, but you'll have some seriously cool historical trivia.
Ooh, I like that. I'm always up for some good trivia.
Okay, so let's set the stage. It's post-World War II. Europe is, like, devastated.
Yeah.
But Canada, well, our infrastructure is mostly intact.
It makes sense.
And our economy is actually, like, humming along pretty well, thanks to all that wartime production, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
Europe, which was a huge trading partner for Canada, was in ruins, and Canada needed new markets for all its goods.
Oh, so it's like they did well during the war, but then they needed to figure out what's next.
Exactly, and that's where the Marshall Plan comes in.
Ah, the Marshall Plan.
Launched in 1947, officially the European Recovery Program, it was meant to rebuild Europe's economies. Now, we often think of this as an American thing,
Right.
but Canada was a key player.
Absolutely. I mean, Canadian goods, especially agricultural products like wheat, were vital for Europe to recover.
Yeah.
And the Marshall Plan, funded by the U.S., helped Europeans buy those Canadian goods.
So it wasn't just like aid going one way.
But not at all. It was a system.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting thing. The Canadian dollar, it wasn't as strong as the U.S. dollar back then.
Huh.
So the Marshall Plan, by letting Europeans buy Canadian goods with American funds, it actually prevented a potential recession in Canada.
Whoa. So this American policy had a massive impact on everyday Canadians.
It did.
Yeah.
It really shows you how interconnected things were, even way back then.
Yeah. So it wasn't just international trade, though.
No.
The Cold War also shaped Canada's domestic policy.
That's right.
The government had this massive task they had to show that capitalism was successful. They needed to counter the whole appeal of communism.
They needed to make capitalism look good.
Yeah.
Effective, appealing.
Yeah. Like, hey, look at us. We're thriving.
Exactly.
Imagine the pressure to create this sense of stability and prosperity while, the Cold War is going on.
Yeah.
So what strategies did they use?
Well, their main strategy was consumerism.
So the buy era starts here.
Yeah, you could say that. The idea was that a thriving consumer economy would show everyone just how strong and attractive capitalism was.
So it wasn't just about recovering from the war, right?
No, it was about a cultural shift.
This whole new mindset focused on material goods and consumption.
Exactly. And you can see this in how quickly the suburbs grew. And there was this push to own homes, cars, appliances, all these symbols of success and prosperity.
It's wild to think how this era, shaped how we think about buying things even today.
Oh, for sure. And we can't forget the role of the government in all of this.
Okay, so how did they encourage this consumer boom?
They invested a ton in infrastructure, and they adopted Keynesian economics, basically. Policies to boost demand and keep people employed.
So global events like the Cold War were shaping the very layout of Canadian cities.
Oh, absolutely.
And even the jobs people had.
It's incredible how these large-scale things affect our everyday lives.
Right. But hold on, there's more to the story. We've got to talk about the Korean War.
Ah, yes, the Korean War. A real tragedy.
For sure.
But it also had a big impact on the Canadian economy.
Right. Military production went up, and there was more demand for things like Canadian steel and agricultural products. So the economy actually grew during the war.
It's a complex thing, isn't it? Sometimes these major global events, even conflicts, can have unexpected positive economic consequences.
Absolutely. And speaking of global stuff, we can't forget Canada's membership in NATO.
Oh, right. Joining NATO in 1949 meant a constant need for military production in Canada that further boosted industrial growth. So on the one hand, there's all this anti-communist talk rooted in ideology, but on the other hand, there were very real economic benefits from it,
Yeah, those two things were totally intertwined. Okay, so I've got the Marshall Plan, the Korean War, NATO, all playing a part in this Canadian economic boom. But what about the Canadian government? What was their role in all this?
Oh, they were key players, for sure. Like their investments in infrastructure, especially in hydroelectric power and highways, were massive for long-term growth. They had a similar impact to those big railway projects back in the late 1800s.
Interesting.
Yeah, they really shaped the country, both physically and economically.
And they were big on Keynesian economics, weren't they?
Totally. This whole idea of the government stepping in to manage demand and keep employment up, it was a big change from how things were before the war.
And this all ties back to the consumerism we were talking about, right?
Yes.
Like the suburbs were growing and everyone wanted TVs, washing machines, fridges, you name it. By the mid-50s, consumerism was like the defining feature of Canadian society.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together. Global politics, economic policies, cultural shifts, even the physical landscape of Canada.
It really shows you that history is more than just memorizing dates and events. It's about understanding all these complex forces that shape our world.
Absolutely. And speaking of understanding history, it's important to remember that there are different interpretations of the same events. Like different perspectives can give us really valuable insights.
Oh, right, like different schools of thought.
Exactly. Different ways of looking at things.
And I'm sure our listeners are familiar with some of these already, but let's break down how they apply to Canada during the Cold War.
Okay, so first up we have the liberal internationalists. They see Canada's actions during this period, particularly with the Marshall Plan and all the rebuilding efforts, as essential for keeping things stable globally, for keeping those Western alliances strong. For them, Canada's economic success was a direct result of its dedication to multilateralism, countries working together.
So they see Canada as this responsible global citizen cooperating with other nations.
Exactly. But there are other perspectives, too, like the Marxist historians.
Right.
They focus on social and economic inequalities. They argue that, yeah, the post-war boom brought prosperity, but the benefits mainly went to the elite, the capitalists.
Ah, so not everyone benefited equally.
Right. They see this rise of consumerism as a way to kind of appease the masses, distract them from ongoing problems like the exploitation of workers.
It's a good reminder that economic growth doesn't always mean everyone wins. Like, it's important to look at who benefits the most and who might get left behind. Are there any other major viewpoints we should consider?
Yeah, we've also got the realist historians. They emphasize the whole geopolitical situation during the Cold War. They'd say that Canada's economic policies were all about strengthening its position against the Soviet Union.
Makes sense, given the context.
Yeah, they argue that building up a strong industrial base at home was vital for military preparedness and for maintaining those crucial alliances, especially with the U.S.
So for them, it's all about national interest, making strategic decisions in this divided world.
That's it. And then you have the revisionist historians.
Okay, what's their take?
They challenge the whole narrative of the West just dominating economically during the Cold War. They point out that the economic boom didn't benefit everyone in Canada equally.
Oh, interesting.
Like, yeah, Ontario and Quebec saw huge industrial growth. But other areas like Atlantic Canada and the prairies didn't do as well.
So there were regional differences.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even within a prosperous nation, there could be significant disparities.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So we've got all these different interpretations, each focusing on different aspects of this complex era. The liberal internationalists highlighting global cooperation, the Marxists reminding us of inequality, the realists emphasizing the geopolitical situation, and the revisionists challenging us to look at regional variations.
It really shows you that there's no single answer when it comes to history.
Right.
It's about understanding these multiple perspectives to get a more complete picture.
And these are just a few of the many interpretations out there. As historians keep researching, new perspectives will surely emerge.
It makes you wonder what future historians will say about our time.
Definitely. Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive into Canada's Cold War economy, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that Canada's economic success during the Cold War was totally intertwined with global events and politics. The Marshall Plan, the Korean War, NATO membership, all these things shaped Canada's economic path.
Couldn't agree more. And it's important to remember that this boom was driven by both opportunity and necessity.
Right, like rebuilding Europe opened up new markets for Canadian goods, but the threat of communism also influenced domestic policies aimed at promoting capitalism.
Exactly. And that's where the whole consumerism thing comes in, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about buying stuff. It was about a certain way of life, about showing off how great the capitalist system supposedly was.
Wild to think how these global events could have such a huge impact on everyday Canadians. It makes you think about how interconnected history really is.
It does. So to leave you with something to think about, as we deal with all the complex economic challenges and geopolitical uncertainties today, are there any parallels to Canada's experience during the Cold War? What lessons can we learn from that period?
That's a great question. It makes you think about the long-term consequences of global events and how they shaped not just economies, but whole societies. And it also makes you think about how historical patterns can help us understand the challenges we're facing today.
It really does make you think. History can give us some amazing insights and perspectives that can help us figure out what to do today.
That's so true. It's not about predicting the future or anything, but it's about, like, recognizing those patterns, understanding how things work.
Exactly. So, listener, what are your thoughts? What really stood out to you about Canada's Cold War economy? What are you still thinking about?
Yeah. Did anything we talk about spark any personal connections, like maybe some family stories or something from your local history?
Or maybe you've seen some links between back then and what's happening today.
We want to hear it all. Share your thoughts, those aha moments, anything that made you curious.
Because that's how we learn best, right?
Yeah.
By talking to each other, asking questions, looking at things from different angles.
Exactly. And if you find any other cool sources about Canada and the Cold War, send them our way. We're always looking to learn more and go deeper into these stories.
There's always something new to discover in history, isn't there?
Mm.
Always more perspectives to think about, more connections to make.
It's never ending. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.